straightforward. First, the students will choose an issue of interest to them. And the way we do it is they can work by themselves or they can work with a team of their choosing, because they all have to be interested in the same thing. They then do some pretty extensive research. They plan an advocacy and messaging strategy, and then they create materials and take actions that are in accordance with that strategy. So I'll go through those different steps. In our school, the way we do it is all 11th graders are doing this in their US history class, and they're all doing it in the late spring. Other schools might do it in other grades. It's also done in the middle school in 8th grade. And so we wanted to have some distance from the 8th grade. And so we picked 11th grade. So the first part, issue selection. What we do is we kind of try to get some lists of possible issues to students, because generally if you just say, what are you interested in? You get back kind of a blank. So they need a starting place. And so what we've done in the past is just get lists of bills that are in front of the State House, and then also gather lists of issues in the town of Needham, as well as the city of Boston for our Boston students, and then, let them kind of noodle on those and think about what interests them. The most important guidance to the students is that they need to really be true to themselves. Pick something that interests them, pick something they care about. It's perfectly okay that they take opposite sides of issues. We're not trying to achieve any kind of consensus or any one issue that a class is going to do, because that would mean that they couldn't really follow their own heart and couldn't do what they want to do. So, every student could do their own different project, different groups can do different things, but there is no kind of forced consensus or agreement that we're trying to reach here. I just looked back at last year and what some of the students in my classes did, and here's a list of some issues. One group did a domestic violence issue, specifically in strengthening restraining orders that they saw as being often violated. Another group was looking at racial inequities in public schools and what could be done about that. There was another group that was concerned that previous marijuana violations from before legalization were not being thoroughly expunged. Another group was working on mandating accurate sex education in the schools. There were a couple of groups doing animal rights, in particular product testing. And there was a group looking at free menstrual products in school shelters and prisons. So that's just an example, but they could really do anything at all that they wanted. In terms of research, again, fairly self-explanatory. They had to describe what was the problem that was out there. They had to examine potential solutions. Now, many of them were actually starting with some solutions in terms of bills, but they needed to, look at different alternatives. And then what's a little bit different for them is looking at the landscape that they would be operating in politically. So who is actually making the decision? Is this a legislative issue, or is it something that could be done by the governor? Is it local? Is it state? Like, where do you go to get this action taken? And who are your allies? What are some interest groups or others who would agree with you? And then who's on the other side. So these last three are maybe a little different than what they would be used to. Then they would have to do and this they would do as a presentation to the class, like a PowerPoint presentation, but a presentation of their entire strategy. So the nature of the problem, the solution that they're proposing, their major arguments, answers to objections, but then you get into more of the strategy piece. So who's on your side and who's against you, and how powerful are they? We then asked them to look at three major categories of ways to do advocacy work. So lobbying, meaning a direct contact with the decision maker, going to Beacon Hill or calling, et cetera. Grassroots organizing, meaning finding the supporters that you have out there that could be activated and getting them organized to do an email campaign or social media, et cetera. And then last, engaging the media. So trying to get media coverage for your issue, letters to the editor, op-eds, et cetera. And what they needed to do is figure out which of these strategies they can use for their issue, how to best use them, and what the total strategy would be. In the case of this project, they come up with a strategy which is much bigger than what they're actually going to execute. But they think about, if they were really devoting a lot of time to this, how could they use all the different strategies? Then for the project, as we have outlined it, they produce some materials to turn in. All teams have to produce a fact sheet. And then the way we did it was, depending on the size of the team, you would do like one of these other things for each team member. So an op-ed, a letter to the editor, a written committee testimony, a grassroots plan, contacting local officials, et cetera. So they would do a menu of these things that would make sense given their strategy. And they would turn those in to the teacher as well as presenting their strategy. So that's what the project was last year. In terms, and last year, Needham High School just piloted it and did it on its own. This year, the league is supporting Needham High School in the Civics project. And so we are going to put on a Civics showcase at the end of the year. We're going to do it on Saturday, June 11th. We have in our town hall, we have a really beautiful space. It's kind of large, so I hope we can fill it enough, but it's a sort of grand space, which we thought would be more exciting to people than just being in one of the school cafeterias. So that's where we're holding it on a Saturday afternoon, where it's being organized by the league in concert with the schools. And we're going to have a format of a kind of a science fair gallery walk where the students will sit at tables and they will have their materials. And then people can walk around and they can engage with those people and explain to them their issue and what action they want taken. So this is a form of advocacy in and of itself, as the students engage with members of the community, as who are walking around and talking to them. So it will be optional for the students, but we're looking for ways to encourage as much participation as possible. So we're looking for a way to have some sort of recognition by the league that, frankly, they can put on their college applications. These are 11th graders, so that means something to them. And we're encouraging teachers to give them extra credit if they come to the event. In terms of invitees, we want to have as many state and local officials as possible, so that, again, the students can have a real chance to advocate about their issues to people who are in a position to make change. We also want to have local advocacy groups come, because they are potential allies for the students and what they're doing. And then as many other people as possible, parents, obviously, league members, and the community at large. So that's the showcase. We are also doing a few things in addition to that. So we're going to help generate a list of issues that students can look at, and we'll be very careful to make them, across the ideological spectrum, not necessarily issues that the league has positions on. We're producing an advocacy handbook, which particularly addresses how to advocate. And where to go, how to do it, advice, models for things like letters to the editor, et cetera. And then we're also putting together some training videos. All of this stuff, Needham is really happy to share. So if anybody, would like to use the advocacy handbook or the training videos on, how to do the advocacy, we're more than happy to share. And the point being, that many of the teachers in our school were a little bit uncomfortable last year, because this is not traditional academic stuff, and they did feel a little bit uncomfortable. But this is where, some of this support from the league can actually be very welcome. And then last, just share some suggestions as you move forward with this, that, a good starting place is just to contact the history or social studies department chair. And that would be the person who's probably the point person on making sure that this project is happening, and to position the league as a support not to in any way suggest a project, but to as a support to make the project more meaningful. The state in the law that mandates this civics project, there are 6 steps that are mandated, and doing a showcase actually accomplishes the last 2 steps, steps 5 and 6. Step 5 is action, and step 6 is showcasing. And those are actually very difficult steps for the students to take on their own, or for the school to encourage. And so this is kind of a convenient way for the school to meet all the requirements that the law lays out. Would recommend that you work with a point person who is actually, a teacher, most likely, who's spearheading the project in the school. And just think about ways to encourage students to participate and get other local officials and others to participate, because I think that's actually the biggest challenge, is getting people to be there and to show up. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I guess I'm happy to take any questions that people have.
So you can either raise your hand, or you could just write a question in the chat and we'll call on you.
Nancy, I see your hand.
That's just fantastic. Is the thing the law requires, is that kind of project where the advocacy project the only thing kids can do, or is it just what Needham has chosen to do?
Well, the advocacy project is what's required by the law. Yeah, so the law says they have
some
to
kind of advocacy.
Well, the law lays out these 6 steps, which is essentially what we're doing. I think there's different ways you could do it, but the law says the students have to pick an issue, they have to research it, they have to, come up with a position, make an advocacy plan, and take some action, and then showcase and reflect. So I suppose there's different ways you could do that, but there does have to be, those elements have to be there.
Thank you.
I see Karen McPherson.
I have a question. Of a couple of the areas that the students chose have been really horrible, electrified issues lately. You talk about racial inequity, or you talk about accurate sex education, and there are always going to be people who will come in and say critical race theory or something like that. And I'm wondering if you ran into any of that at Needham?
So we didn't, but I think that what the critical thing is that the students choose, and that there's no kind of pushing them towards certain issues. So I put this together last year, and I actually, one of the resources I had was a list of links to various interest groups and the different action priorities of those interest groups, just so that they could see. And I was very careful to have interest groups on both sides of the issue. So, we had like Planned Parenthood and NARAL on one side, but we had, Massachusetts Right to Life on the other side. Same thing on guns, So I think that the law is pretty specific here, that the students have to pick the issue. As long as it's student driven, I think, you're going to have potentially people complain, but they complain a lot anyway about lots of things, in history and social science education right now. So if the students are choosing, I think that's really, really key, and nobody pushing them.
Ramel points out and asks, projects are to be nonpartisan, correct?
Well, nonpartisan in the sense that they're not advocating for a candidate or for a party, but the issues, they can take a strong stand on an issue, so nonpartisan only, there's no advocacy for candidates, but it doesn't mean they have to shy away from a tough issue.
Sure. Judy Finkel, I'd like to address Judy Finkel's question myself. She asks, in large districts, are you suggesting selecting one high school with classes of 300 plus students? And the answer to the large district question is that it's very different from dealing with a suburban school district that has one high school. And so we think that what we would suggest is that you contact probably the assistant superintendent, deputy superintendent for curriculum in that district, and also the social studies curriculum coordinator, and work with them on a strategy that would work for their school system. What they might decide to do, for example, is to make it a voluntary showcase that students from across the high schools could participate in, and they might decide that there's one central location where they might do that. That's an example, but that's how I would approach that. Mary Fran Buckley has a question for you, Kathy. How did you connect with the high school?
So I teach in the high school. so it's kind of unusual. So I guess that's not helpful to others, but I think if you did reach out for, I think the history or social studies department chair would be the person just to reach out to.
And one of the things that you'll see in the toolkit is that we have a sample letter, and we'll talk about that later, of who to send it to. And I agree with Kathy that it's good to reach out to the social studies department head, but it's also good to reach out to the other administrators that need to support that social studies department head, because this is something that goes beyond really the scope of their job. It's part of their job, but getting the kind of support that it takes to be able to pull everybody together to put on this showcase really needs some administrative support. So we'll talk to you a little bit later about the outreach letter.
I see, Mary, you have your hand up.
Mary, you're muted.
Hi, how are you? Yeah, I submitted a question. So I'm attending because we had, our normal person was not able to attend, but I read through some of the materials sent out. Is the goal to have every league eventually pair with a school? Is that how is the overall implementation? How looking forward? What are you hoping for this to develop into?
We would love to have all 47 leagues participate in this and pair with at least one of the schools in your district. That would be terrific.
Okay, we just had a type of pairing where we had a couple of teachers that went to the Harvard Business School training in the case method, and we had a public forum or a presentation with the high school and students. It was on our local cable on the Voting Rights Act, and that was in January. So this would be another type of outreach. I'm not sure if we'd be able to pull this off this year, but it's something to look forward into the future.
Sure.
Yeah.
Mary Sterling.
Sure. So a comment and a question. I was so pleased with these slides, Kathy. They're very concise, and I'm wondering if we can have access to them.
Certainly, yeah. If Patty, if you want to put the link in the chat, I think you can do that. They're if you have the link, you can access them.
Terrific.
Yeah.
And my comment is that your slides really show a high school level approach to this process, but it's also required at 8th grade.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the privilege of mentoring an 8th grader last spring shortly during his project. And an 8th grader follows exactly the same process, but at a more simple level. And so, for example, this 8th grader was concerned that nationally, people can't be punished for destroying the flag. But in Massachusetts, we still have a very old law that calls it a criminal act to destroy the flag. And he felt like the Massachusetts legislature should know about this and should change it. And so he had his issue, he looked at it, but not to the extent you described, much more at an 8th grader's level.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was already connected through Susan Fry worked with our middle school in Concord for our state representative to come and speak to eighth graders. So he knew he could write her a letter about it, and that would be his advocacy. And I just wanted to comment to folks that it's the same process, it's the same values, but it can be done at a simpler level at the eighth grade.
Good point. Anybody else have any questions for Kathy before we move on to talk more about the implementation strategy?
I did see one other question in the chat of should they have to show both sides of the issue that I wanted to address, because actually they don't, because they're advocating for one. So this is about learning how to be an advocate. So as long as they decide what their side of the issue is, that is what they're presenting. They do not have to present both sides. It's not a typical academic sort of exercise.
And I'm not seeing any other questions, so let's switch gears and talk a little bit more about implementation in general. Kathy, thank you so much. It really, really makes a difference to be able to see a concrete example and know how one school district is going about the process of implementing it. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the implementation details, and I'm going to refer to some of the items that are in the toolkit. The first one I'm going to talk about is the overview of the school civic celebration project. And the thing to say about that is that we've given you 3 options to discuss with the school that you connect with. And so it's really a very flexible way to work with the school. The first option that we suggest for celebrating events, the projects, is to do a showcase, and Kathy has given you an example of how that might be done. But as she herself said, other schools might choose to do it in a different way and in a different time. The thing that our committee discovered when we talked to some of our local schools is that they discovered some of the schools do not yet feel ready to do a showcase. And a big factor that's playing out here is the fact that we've gone through the pandemic and we're still going through the pandemic. And this Omicron surge didn't help matters. Some of the schools feel a little bit reluctant to do a project that big in terms of a showcase. We suggested in the materials that an example of a smaller project would be to invite the schools to nominate a few students or student teams that would be willing to be interviewed on local cable access TV. And that would be a way to celebrate their projects. We could highlight what they're doing, really commend them for what they're doing. They might be interviewed by not only 1 or 2 league members, but also you might involve a mayor, a town manager. So that's a second way. And then the third, pretty obvious, is that you and the high school, middle school that you're working with might come up with something totally different. And so if they have an alternative option, go with it. And our idea here is that we want the schools to feel good about what we're doing. We want them to feel comfortable and that we're not burdening them. This is a project that they have to do anyway, but how they showcase, how they celebrate is really up to them. All we're doing is giving them some support for doing that. So for example, some schools might say, well, we want to put on a virtual showcase. Well, if that's what they want to do, then work with them and how they might do that. And one of the resources that we can provide is certainly involving community members, both the activists as well as elected officials. And that's the kind of resource that would be helpful in making those kinds of outreaches. Teachers don't have the time to make those phone calls themselves. So the second document, and Patty's going to put this up on share the screen for this, is the suggested timeline for the project. And I'd like to go straight to the week of February 28th. And you'll see that we mentioned here, local leagues send outreach letter to the schools to invite their collaboration and follow up with the schools to set up a date for an appointment. So we wanted to make this easy for you. That's why we did a sample letter. We suggest that you send it to the school superintendent and to we've listed the assistant superintendent for curriculum, the middle school, high school principal, the social studies curriculum department head or coordinator. That model, as we've mentioned previously, is good for a small school district. If you're dealing with a large urban school district, I'd go straight to the assistant superintendent for curriculum and the social studies curriculum coordinator. And they, in their outreach and work with other administrators, would draw them in. We suggest that you send this to them by email because it is faster. And it's always a good idea when you're dealing with a superintendent or an assistant superintendent to CC their school secretary. Just as we have a hard time keeping up with our email, boy, do they have a hard time keeping up with their email. So the secretary is your friend. You may find that you're going to need to follow up with a phone call. And basically what we're looking for them to do in this letter that we're initiating is for them to decide who is it that they want to be the point person on this project to talk with you and collaborate with you. And then we're talking about the month of March. We would like local leagues to come to an agreement with schools on a strategy to celebrate the student work. And then you'd be using the month of March and April to complete the plans for that implementation of whatever strategy you selected. What we envision is that you would be actually doing whatever you've selected as a celebration in May or June. Now you notice that I've mentioned Massachusetts Civic Learning Coalition, and I've mentioned that in June. We presently, and by we I'm saying LWVMA as represented by Patty Comfort and myself, are right now partnering in a discussion with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and the Mass Civic Learning Coalition to see if we can put on a state level showcase. We're thinking of this as a pilot to test how it might be done. And if we're able to pull this off, we would circle back to local leagues and talk to you about ways that you might be able to participate. One of the ways is simply to inform and encourage the schools that you're working with to participate. And another way is that we might want help in reviewing some of the student work. And we might talk to you about whether or not you might like to be a reviewer of some of those projects. The other thing to say is the Massachusetts Civic Learning Coalition. Who are they? That's an organization that was formed around passing this 2018 legislation. And they are comprised of educational organizations that do curriculum development in civic education, groups like iCivics, Generation Citizen, Facing History, Facing Ourselves, the National History Project. Also universities, Harvard, Tufts are represented. And then there are other civic organizations, for example, the John F. Kennedy Museum, the Edward M. K. Institute for the Study of the Senate. And of course, we as a league are a member of that coalition. One of the things that they are doing is to put on a Massachusetts Civic Learning Week, which will take place March 7th through 11th. And during this week, workshops are going to be presented by partner organizations or by schools on some aspect of civic education. And I think this will be very interesting to view. It's meant to be for a student audience, a teacher and administrator audience, as well as a community audience. And I know that many of us in the league have been concerned for a number of years that civic education has fallen by the wayside. Well, you will have your heart warmed by watching some of these sessions, because it'll give you some examples of some very good things that are happening in civic education. I just want to close my comments by mentioning that we would like to be able to support you. We realize that this is a big project. And so there's two ways that we have indicated we'd like to be of support. One is we'd like to have 2 or 3 more of these kinds of sessions where we could share ideas, where you could talk about what are you experiencing in your outreach with the schools, and we could do any problem solving that anybody needs to problem solve, or we could simply share ideas. The third session, whether it's the second or third, I'd like us to meet at the end so that we really have a chance to share with each other how it went. And what can we learn from this first round of doing this. There is a second way we'd like to provide some support, and that is by starting a Google group email chain that is specifically focused on this project. So if you have a quick question that you want an answer to, you'll be able to get an answer. So those are my comments, and what we'd like to do now is to open up to further questions that you might have.
If folks want to raise their hands or put their question in the chat. People had asked me to, I just put the chat in the link to the toolkit in the chat. So the whole toolkit, including the timeline that we were just showing, is in our toolkits and webinars section of our website. So just go to the menu drop down and pick toolkits and webinars, and then the school civics celebration toolkit is there. Nobody has questions?
I was wondering, Karen, is there going to be a follow-up to the local leagues on this timeline to see if they've gotten connected to the schools in the first place?
Yes, actually, one way to do that is that we've asked the leagues, when they send out that outreach letter, there's a CC to Patty Comfort, and that will automatically let us know if Patty receives those letters that the leagues have sent that out. So that's one way for us to do that. Good point. Thank you, Ramel. Mary.
I just want to underscore something you said, Karen, which I thought was important, and that is, you know, you go small, you go where there's some interest. If it's just a few people, a small collection, that's better than nothing. In other words, it doesn't have to be grand this first spring. We have a situation where the middle school was all ready to rock on this, but the high school said, nah, maybe not. And so we said, well, why don't you come and visit, be official visitors at the middle school showcase, and you can see it in action. And I think that that's a simple way to say, okay, you don't have to do something, but come participate in this way. And I think you mentioned you need to go with what your local league and what your local community is kind of ready for. And with Omicron and the virus, everything we've gone through, we have to really be flexible about it. So
Flexible and considerate. They've been under a lot of pressure. Anyone else? Meredith?
Now, so will the communities will be doing their own, they'll be starting this and all the teachers will be working on this with the kids. I'm
Yes.
assuming in every high school. So if your league doesn't have a collaboration, a direct, and my assumption is they're also going to be having some level of showcase as well. That's part of the requirements am I correct on that?
Well, you can showcase in a variety of ways. A school might decide that they want to do it in a very low-key way.
Right.
So it might not be on their horizon as much. I think for many of them, it's going to be, how can I get through this project? Am I able to get it done so that the students complete the project? And they're
Sure.
probably a little bit less worried about a celebration. So if you make contact with the school, you're actually doing them a favor in some way, because you're saying that you're interested, you'd like to help out, and maybe if we can come up with an idea that works for them without too much stress, you as a league can take on a lot of the organizing and arranging for making that happen.
Mhm.
So, Lori, if you don't mind, if I can call on you, I wonder if you might have a reaction to that. Lori's a teacher in Salem.
What exactly do you want me to respond to? I'm sorry.
Well, I think Meredith was asking, every school is working on this and every school is going to do a celebration. And well, they're supposed to, not every school is, really ready to do a big celebration. What's your perspective on that?
I mean, I teach in Salem, Mass, so I'll be honest, like our project is geared towards 10th graders and, our numbers are still all over the place in terms of the virus. So it's really hard to plan right now. We're starting in 4th quarter to work on this project. So I think it's going to vary from district to district and what the expectations I think may be, to be honest. It's just sort of the way it is, I think. I don't know if I'm probably not answering your question appropriately.
Well, I just wanted to, and I'm a former teacher as well. I worked in a middle school and I saw when this started to go through, I saw our social studies teachers in the spring working on things like this. And all I was thinking is if there isn't a formalized plan between our local league and the school, would it be appropriate for us to just approach and say, hi, how are you doing on this, and have a dialogue? I agree. There's a lot of pressure going on in the schools right now. They don't need to have something added to it if it's not planned well in advance, if it comes up so relatively new, but it might be nice to have we have a lady that has worked closely with the high school, and she could certainly touch base with them and ask them how it's going. It doesn't necessarily have to be a formalized celebration. And I'm thinking that might be the way for us to go.
Yeah, I think it's going to vary district from district, to be honest. Like I said, it's myself and another colleague. We teach the entire sophomore class for US history. And so it's him and I that are doing all the work with this. And so with this project, and I know we've been talking about like, what is the end product going to look like? And, we definitely want to do a showcase. And because I'm also a teacher, a high school history teacher here in Salem, and I'm a member of the league in Salem as well, I definitely, we're going to be trying to work and bring the two groups together. But what that looks like, I don't know yet.
Okay, all right.
And if this league does not have a personal connection, that's why we've given you that letter in the toolkit to send to the various administrators to get the ball rolling. It's a good way to break the ice, start it, and find out who they'd like to appoint as the contact person. Well, if there are no other questions, I think we're ready for some closing comments by Patty.
Yes, thanks, Karen. I just want to really express my appreciation to Karen. I think I said at the beginning that she was really the brains behind the league of, the Massachusetts League getting involved in this. And You know, she came to me a while back and sort of this has been in motion for a while. So I really appreciate her bringing that to us. And then she assembled a great committee that worked all fall on, you know, putting together the plans and the toolkit now that we have. So just a really big thank you to Karen and her committee. Fabulous job. Nancy Brumbick has her hand up.
I just want to say that Karen was also one of the people behind getting this law written and passed. Before it became a project, it was a law, and she was a member of the committee that drafted and helped draft the language for this law. So she's been doing this for a while.
And Nancy was right there. That was one of my very first things to do on the Legislative Action Committee. And she showed me the ropes of how to testify at the State House. So this whole thing has been a real experience in civic education for me as well. One of my fond moments at that hearing too was that one of the social studies coordinator in Chelmsford was there at the hearing too, and she was advocating for that, and that was the district that I retired from. So it was nice to see that connection.
Yeah, so we've taken it all the way from a bill to a law, and now we're in the implementation phase and are going to help, you know, help showcase what those projects are. So it's super exciting. Karen mentioned earlier that we were hoping to put together a couple of meetings so that people can check in with each other. So we'll be back in touch with you about that. And the other thing we thought about was creating, and I want to get everyone's sort of take the temperature on this from you all, putting together an email group that would consist of all of us so that folks could shoot each other questions as they come up, as you're reaching out to the schools, you know, obstacles you're facing or successes you've had or tips you want to give someone else, that kind of thing. So if people are willing to be in that kind of an email group, I can put that together and send out a first message, and then everyone will be connected. So I guess the way to do it is if someone does not want to be in that email group, would you please email me and I will not include your email address in that. And let me just put my email in the chat right now. So if that makes sense, that's what we'll do. And does anybody have any strong objection? Yeah, go ahead, Ramil.
I had a question that I should have asked earlier. Are we going to create a press release around this new project from the league position that local leagues could send to their local papers? Or are we going to keep this in-house, so to speak, until it's done because of confidentiality of the students or something like that?
I would suggest that the time to do a press release is after you and the school have agreed on some kind of celebration. And then what you want to do is to inform the community about that. I wouldn't do it at this initial stage. Right now, what you need to do is protect your relationship with the school system and let that be a private conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think with that, I'll just close by saying thanks to everyone who's on the call. You know, this is not intended as a must, but we do want to be able to give local leagues the opportunity to interact with the schools on these student-led civics projects. And we're hoping that, you know, we might get off to a kind of a slow start, but the idea is that we'll get the ball rolling this year and we'll continue to sort of grow and improve on what we're doing as we go along. So thank you all for being here, and I hope everyone has a wonderful evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.